Start the webinar. Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Paul Sevilla, Adult Services Librarian at the Livermore Public Library and chairperson for this year's Livermore Reads Together community-wide reading program, featuring the Western mystery novel Silver Lies by local author Anne Parker. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Friends of the Livermore Public Library for sponsoring this event, as well as our other Livermore Reads Together programs throughout the month. Their support makes programs like this possible. Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest author, Marianne Monson, an award-winning and best-selling writer known for uncovering extraordinary stories of remarkable women. She is the author of 12 books for both children and adults, with a strong focus on frontier-era women's history. Her nonfiction book, Frontier Grit, was nominated for the American Library Association's Amelia Bloomer Award, and its companion volume, Women of the Blue and Gray, received a silver medal from Forward Reviews. Marianne's newest historical novel, The Opera Sisters, is based on the true story of Ida and Louise Cook, two courageous women who helped refugees escape from Nazi Germany. Her poetry and prose have appeared in Rain Magazine, Hit Fish, Coast Weekend, the Seattle Times, Northwest Review, and Our Coast Magazine. We are honored to have her with us this evening to share her work and the stories behind it. Joining us from Oregon, actually Texas right now, Marianne Monson. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Paul. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, I'll let you do the presentation and then we'll meet again for a Q&A. And for those with questions, please type them in the chat.
Perfect. Can everybody see the slides with my books? Is that visible? Okay, I'm gonna go with that is. So, um, anyway, happy Women's History Month, everyone, and welcome to whether you're from Livermore, California, or wherever you may be joining us tonight. And I'd like to extend a great thank you to Paul and the Friends of the Livermore Library. And actually, just all librarians in general who do such an important work in our community with connecting readers with books and preserving important records and just generally keeping us connected with facts, which is really important right now. So as he said, I'm Marianne Monson and I write women's history. A lot of my work centers on the frontier era, which I think is so fun that that's the focus. And let me see if I can advance the slides here. There we go. Okay. So these are hidden mother photographs, and they were really common during the Victorian era. Uh, they seem a little bit macabre and creepy, I think, to most of us as modern viewers today. But of course, it was came from a time when camera exposures were really long and children had a hard time holding still. So I guess, to help the children remain still enough to not end up with a blurred image, they would drape the mother with a cloth and then they would have the mother hold the child still. Um, So if you like, you can fall down this rabbit hole all day long. And if you want to just Google hidden mother Victorian era photographs, you're going to find like hundreds of these. These are just a couple of them. Eh, I think to modern viewers they look a little bit ridiculous because it's like we see you, you're right there. But I like to start off this talk by referencing these photographs because I think they're actually a wonderful symbol of how women have often been represented throughout history. So, very often they've been seen as supporters, especially of their children, um, doing silent work in the background without having a chance to really be recognized or to tell a story from their own point of view. And over the last several decades, a lot of public historians and a lot of feminist historians have been working to essentially remove those coverings and allow her to speak. And that's, I think, part of what we get to do tonight with some of these stories. I was lucky enough to grow up in a family that told a lot of stories. My family was LDS and was connected with our pioneer ancestry as often as really common in that culture. So I grew up with lots of stories about my pioneer ancestors. Some of them were even true, I bet. Um, like stories within families, they often blur the lines to legends, and it can be difficult to separate that fact from fiction. But either way, it really was a privilege to have two grandmothers who just raised me on the stories of incredibly sturdy and remarkably resilient pioneer women, particularly. These are a couple of them. And I actually love looking at this picture because you can just see all of their different personalities come through. The older woman at the center, her name is Flora Mabon Madison, and she was a lace maker and an immigrant from Yorkshire, England. So, oh, I'm going to back up just a little bit. I should have I, before we dive in, actually, I'll just hold this book up. So, as Paul mentioned, we're talking tonight about Frontier Grit. So, this is my book that is based on 12 amazing pioneer women. And basically, it's 12 microbiographies. Each chapter is a story of a different pioneer woman. So, what happened is in 2014 or so. So it's been a little while now, actually. My editor said to me, "I think you should write a story, a book about pioneer women. Would you be interested in doing that?" And I thought about it. And like given my background and my history, it made a lot of sense. I had a lot of those stories that I'd always loved and had known about. But there was also a sense of how much pioneer history, like that word is very loaded and very tied to westward expansionism. I was like, do we really need another story about pioneer women? But it made me start thinking, like, what do we really mean by the word pioneer? It became a really interesting question to me because on the one hand there was the connotations around the word pioneer are very much connected to what was actually a government propaganda campaign, which was this idea of manifest destiny, and we want to go west, and the United States is destined to go from sea to shining sea. And it really was, connected with white people going west and claiming land and taking it from indigenous people. And so, like the narrative was inherently a problem. But as I dove into it more, like there was that part of what it is to be a pioneer. But I realized that in a broader sense that the word pioneer really just refers to a person who travels beyond their own cultural boundaries. So the people that they know and interact with in their community, what has anyone in that community ever been to this place over there? Do they have stories about it? Do they have a sense of what is out there? Um, and that other place may be inhabited by someone else. But to me, the thing that was most interesting was that a person dared to step beyond their own community's understanding of a certain location. And the thing is, once I decided to expand it that way to like focus on women who traveled beyond their own community or beyond their own culture, then the word got really exciting to me because I realized that there were women who had traveled many different directions and for many different reasons who we wouldn't traditionally think of as being pioneers. Because if we expanded it that way, there were Native women who were forcibly removed east. Like, so were they pioneers? I mean, yeah, they were. They were certainly stepping beyond their own cultural boundaries, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly, right? There were a lot of formerly enslaved folks who traveled north in the Great Migration. Were they pioneers? Of course they were pioneers. So they were traveling beyond the known, like the known cultural community in which they had grown up. So, like that bravery, that sense of wanting to see what was beyond, and almost always connected with wanting to make a better life for themselves, like that was what I was really interested in looking at. Um, and so when I started thinking about it that way, and like Mexican American women also often went north, and those frontier boundaries of the West were constantly shifting, like Texas was part of Mexico, and so was California. And so the frontier kept shifting. And even though in a lot of modern movies, the frontier is very white, that's actually not accurate at all. The frontier was actually incredibly diverse and just a huge connection of different cultures and languages and people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So I was interested in capturing the women who were part of that particular frontier experience. And so when I went back to my editor and I said, "Okay, I want to write, I will write a book about frontier, about pioneer women, as long as I can define it like this," she was very excited about it, and she said, "Yeah, let's do it. That makes sense." So this is one of the women featured in Frontier Grit. Her name is Aunt Clara Brown. I don't know if anybody's heard of her. Actually, I'd love to hear, like later you can chime in the comment section and say whether you've heard of any of these women before, because some of them can be regionally known. So like maybe if you ever lived in Colorado, you might have heard of Clara because that's where she spent a lot of her life. And tonight I'm just highlighting a few of the women, and then you can go read the book and read the rest of the stories. But I specifically picked a couple of the women connected with California. But Aunt Claire Brown was born in Virginia. She was born enslaved around 1800. So her actual birth date was not recorded, as was common with um, enslaved people at that time. She ended up buying her own freedom, which was really unusual. She ended up the family that she was enslaved by moved several times, and she moved with them. And so she was in Kentucky at the time when she became free. So the her enslaver, who she actually was lucky enough to be very close to that family, he died, and in his will, he said that she could be free. And he also left her money. And the Kentucky law said that an enslaved person, um, in order to gain their freedom, had to go to the auction block, and a person had to bid on them and then set them free. So even though this family already had like owned um, Clara, she had to go back to the auction block. And then that family had to bid on her again, had to pay for her again. And then she had to contribute around a third of the purchase price, which she did. And and then she was free. And then after that, she still had a single year to leave the state of Kentucky or she would be re-enslaved. So of course she was definitely ready to get out of Kentucky. And I should also back up and mention that Clara got married. She had four children, um, and tragically, before the owner that I was mentioning, who was kind, the her previous owner decided to sell the entire family and sold them separately. So her husband and her son got sold south, and she never saw them again. Um, then she had uh, two, she had three daughters. One of her daughters drowned. She was a twin. And then the other two daughters were sold to another place. So then she was sent, sold to yet a third place. So also it was illegal for enslaved people to read or write. So she had no real way to stay in contact with her family once they were split and divided all of these different places, which was very intentional about the slave system. So Clara decided she needed to leave the state of Kentucky once she'd bought her freedom, and so she signed up to work as a cook on a wagon train going west. Because she was black, they would not let her sleep in the wagon. So she was cooking and doing laundry for the entire group of pioneers going west. And then she was sleeping on the ground at night. She ended up in Colorado. In Colorado, she was really good with money, and she saved the rest of that money that she'd inherited from the man who passed away, whose last name was Brown. That's where she took her last name from. She used it to buy a very small, simple shack once she got to Colorado. A few months later, she sold it for a profit, and then she went higher into the mining towns in the mountains. She bought a two-room cabin up there, and she set up a laundry business. So, uh, the thing that was really smart is that there was no other laundry business in this rough and tumble mining town. So she charged the exorbitant rate of 50 cents a shirt, and she made a killing. And like I said, she was very good with money. So she saved it. She would often do laundry in exchange for shares in people's mining ventures, some of which ended up paying off really well. Um, oh, sorry. I think that maybe we'll come back. I think I bumped something. Um,
Oh, yeah, we lost your PowerPoint, so
yeah, did it come back yet?
not yet, not yet.
Okay, okay. I think it's coming back slowly. Sorry.
It's
It was
okay.
just a faulty cable. But anyway, there's nothing new to see just yet. Let me see. I might need to. Can you see it yet? Oh, you know what? I might need to share again. Hold on. Yes, I think I do. Okay. There we go. All right. Think we're back. So yeah, so she charged 50 cents a shirt, and then she saved that money. She used it to help set up a church and some other causes that she cared about. But she basically amassed a huge fortune. She became one of the wealthiest women in the West. And what her goal was to use that fortune to find her last remaining daughter. She knew her husband and her son seemed to have passed away. She could not get any word about them. She knew that that two of her other daughters were gone, but there was another daughter, one of the twins, whose name was Eliza Jane, and she wanted to amass as much fortune money as possible to try to look for her. So she went on several trips back to the American South looking for her daughter. She did not find her daughter on those trips, but what she did find was, this was right after the Civil War, she found a number of formerly enslaved people who had no work and had wanted to leave the South, but didn't have many opportunities as to where they should go. She said, "Come to California." And she actually arranged a whole wagon train for these people. And she helped bring them to to Colorado, helped them get set up, helped them get jobs, helped them get housing. She basically was her own little, you know, uh, relocation committee in helping these people start their lives again at the end of slavery. She had, you know, a head start since she had purchased her freedom years before the Civil War. Um, and then, so she did this a number of times, variations of the story a number of times. She went to Kansas with the exodusters when there were a lot of people living in camps there. She went and helped. Again, she was looking for her daughter. She could not find her daughter, but she certainly found plenty of people to help. Um, but yeah, eventually, near the very end of her life, she did get news that someone who had the same name as her daughter was living back east, and she decided to take a train back east to see if it was her. And she ended up being reunited with her daughter after all of those years. So I'm just waiting for Hollywood to make a movie out of Aunt Claire Brown because I think her story is so remarkable. I can't read it or even talk about it without tearing up a little bit. It's just such an incredibly beautiful story. So that is Aunt Claire Brown's story. Um, and let's see. I'm gonna see if it's gonna let me. Yes. All right. So this is one of the women who's connected with California that I mentioned I wanted to highlight because many of you are in California tonight. So Charlie Parkhurst was born in 1812 in Sharon, Vermont. And she is another one of those women where it's very hard to separate fact from fiction. Like what we think we know about her. There's just so many legends, so many campfire legends, and it can be difficult to track down sources for almost any of it. Also, this was a day when they didn't have many journalistic standards, and so people would just print whatever in the newspapers. They weren't the most reliable. Um, anyway, but it seems like the most probable narrative about Charlie Parkhurst is that her mother died and her father died, and so she was an orphan, and so she was institutionalized into an orphanage in the East. She had a pretty miserable childhood. Orphanages were not pleasant places. Um, in the early 1800s. So she escaped from the orphanage around the age of 9 or 10. She hid in a horse stable, and a man who owned the horse stable found her. And she was dressed as a boy, and she said her name was Charlie, and she loved horses. So the man took her in and, essentially let him assist with the horses, um, and allowed Charlie to be raised as one of his own children. She kept her assumed male identity. Um, and it's, difficult to impossible to know exactly what that motivation was, whether she identified as male or if it allowed her to follow the profession that she loved, which was certainly barred to women at that time. Um, so she lived the rest of her life with the male identity. And always around horses. She became an incredible stagecoach driver. She became one of the most famous stagecoach drivers in the whole American West. It was said that if there was a silver dollar lying on the road, that Charlie could drive the front and back wheels of a stagecoach over that single silver dollar. She was incredible with a whip, incredibly accurate, and she used that whip a number of times. Stagecoach driving at the time was very dangerous. Um, it, you can see the stagecoach driver sat up front. They were exposed to all the elements. They had like rain and hail and winds, beating on them at all times. So they had to wear a hat, but they through all sorts of weather. Um, and they were managing a team of horses, so she would have had several pairs of reins in her left hand and her whip in the right. Um, And a lot of times, stagecoaches were held up by bandits. A few times that happened to her. The first time she was held up, she was robbed at gunpoint and had to hand over the strong box that was kept on top of the coach. She swore that was never going to happen again, and it never did happen again. So the next time she got held up, she shot first with a gun. Another time, she actually used her whip to blind the person who was holding her up. So word got out that she was not somebody to be messed with, and they mostly, left her alone after that. So she eventually retired in Watsonville, California. She lived out the rest of her days with her assumed male identity. She did register to vote. We don't know if she actually ever voted in an election, but if she did, this was, decades before women were allowed to vote in the US. So she may have been one of the first women to vote in the US. And then when she died, newspapers around the country, she was famous all over the country, talked about how Charlie Parkhurst, the great stagecoach driver, was dead. But when they washed her body and they prepared her for burial, they realized that she had been born female. So this was like a stunning revelation to people at the time. It's just like the people who, especially who didn't think women were even capable of doing the things that Charlie was doing, were just completely blown away. And actually, I'm going to read this funny article. So the Providence Journal observed the only people who have any occasion to be disturbed by the career of Charlie are the gentlemen who have so much to say about women's sphere and the weaker vessel. Meanwhile, her obituary in the Santa Cruz Sentinel concluded, "Who shall no longer say that a woman cannot labor and vote like a man?" So this was a nation that was like hotly debating women's rights at the time, like what women could do, couldn't do, what they were capable of, like when, and so the news of Charlie's identity was quite the news. Like I said, it from New York City papers, from sea to shining sea, everybody was interested in Charlie Parkhurst. It's interesting. I'm very curious to know if anybody in the audience had heard of her before this talk. And so this is another woman who spent a lot of her life in California. So again, feel free to let us know if you have heard of her. But her name was Donaldina Cameron. She was actually born in New Zealand and she immigrated to the US with her family to settle in California. Her father bought a farm um, uh, south of San Francisco. And she was the youngest of a big family, so she was, with her siblings. And she heard about this school in Chinatown, San Francisco, um, where they rescued girls who had been sold into the slavery in San Francisco, and then provided them a house and a safe place to be. So at this time, there were all sorts of laws that made it really difficult to be a person of Chinese descent. So there were Chinese exclusion laws. There was no path to citizenship. They weren't allowed to own land or property. They weren't allowed to work in a lot of different professions. Um, a lot of times they were brought in to do the most menial, most difficult jobs, like they laid, our railroads basically, but then would get kicked out and not allowed to settle in many places in the US. Um, and laws changed as time progressed, making it illegal for Chinese women to come. And so even men who had wives back in China were not able to bring their wives. And so it just became an incredibly difficult climate. Chinese men outnumbered Chinese women in San Francisco around the turn of the century about 20 to 1. So So, a huge illegal trade in the trafficking, the sex trafficking specifically of Chinese girls and women developed. Many girls in China were sold by their families. Some of their families had no idea what they were. Some of them were told that their kids, their daughters, were going to go to school in California and have a good life there. But the reality is that Chinese girls, when they were quite young, as you can see in there, they were forced to do a lot of household drudgery, like to be servants from the age of 4, and to also care for younger children. And then when they became teenagers, then they were pushed into prostitution. So, so this house that Donaldina went to, she committed for 1 year. And when she went there, she just absolutely fell in love with the work. Um, so this is the image that you're looking at right now is an image of Donaldina Cameron standing at the bottom where while a police officer in plain clothes helps to rescue a girl from a place where she has been incarcerated, where she's been kept locked up. So Donaldina Cameron became known for being able to find these girls where they were being hidden by the Tongs and the organized Chinese crime gangs. She had like a sixth sense about it. She would find them under trapdoors and in hidden walls, and she had to move very quickly because they would move the locations of the girls to try to escape. And if they didn't get them, then the girls were gone and very difficult to find again. So this is one of those rescues. So she would help to find these girls that had been trafficked. Then she would take them back to the mission home, and many of them she became very close to and really considered her own daughters. Um, as I'm sure many of you know, there was a fire and earthquake in 1906. This impacted the house where Donaldina Cameron was working with the girls. And the numbers fluctuated because some of the girls could leave, like they were allowed to leave if they wanted to, of course. Some would, when they got older, they would choose to go back to China. They would get married, they would go on with their lives, of course. Um, but basically, there were around 50 or so girls and young women at the home during the earthquake. And of course, they felt the earthquake first, and then the fire started, and it was quite close to them. So Donaldina helped walk the girls to safety. They took initial shelter nearby in a more intact building, but then with the fire, they realized they were going to have to relocate to a farm that was farther out of town. So with the girls, some of them like they had like 3 infants that they had to carry. So they walked 4 miles with the girls. To safety, to get them to safety. Once they were there, Donaldina realized that she had left all of this really important paperwork about the girls back in the building in San Francisco. And she realized that without that paperwork, she would not be able to necessarily prove the identity of some of the girls and young women in the home. And she was afraid that the Tongs would recognize that she probably lost this paperwork and would attempt to take some of the girls back and basically say that she didn't have a legal right to have them. So she walked back in the middle of the night. At this point, there's guards outside the building saying, "You're not allowed to go inside." He actually had a gun and said he was supposed to shoot anyone on sight. And Donaldina said, "Well, then shoot me." So she said, "I'm going in." And he followed her inside and she said, "I have to get this paperwork." And, like the building, parts of the building is on fire, but she is not going to say no. She's not going to take no as an answer. So she goes and, of course, finds the paperwork, rescues it to keep her girls safe. But I think that's an amazing story in terms of the lengths of to which she was willing to go to protect these girls and young women. After the fire, it warped and twisted a lot of the bricks, and as you may know, those bricks that are twisted in the fire, like they have a very beautiful patina you can see on the right hand image. They're called clinker bricks because technically, like they've been turned to glass. If you clink them together, they make a really beautiful sound. So they rebuilt the building out of the burned bricks, and it still stands in San Francisco today. I took these pictures when I visited. Eventually, Donald Dana Cameron stayed for 40 years as director. And so it was originally called the Occidental Board Presbyterian Mission House, but it would later be renamed the Cameron House. And that's the name you would find it under today. And even though she retired eventually as a director, she never stopped being involved with the work of the house. And yeah, today it's still it works with youth programming in San Francisco and um, does kind of aligned mission work that is obviously different now. But she's just an incredible, incredible woman. Okay, so I just thought that I would mention a little bit about some of my other books. And we're mostly talking about Frontier Grit, but this is Women of the Blue and Gray, but that Paul also mentioned. This is true stories about women from the Civil War, mothers, medics, soldiers, spies. More than 700 women dressed up as soldiers during the Civil War. They assumed male identities and fought as soldiers. They fought in every major battle of the Civil War, which I think a lot of people don't know. Some of them after the war returned to female identities, and some of them decided to remain with male identity. So that's kind of interesting. The but many of them worked as spies and in espionage work, especially in the early years of the war. So that is a book to check out if you are a Civil War buff fan. I feel like even you can know a lot about the Civil War, but not know a ton about the women of the Civil War because it's tended to be a bit more buried. Um, and I will just mention one of my favorite heroes, Harriet Tubman, and I talk about her in this book because in addition to what most people know her for, her work with the Underground Railroad, she actually had an incredible espionage career too, and she designed the Combahee River raid, which was an incredibly successful river raid that freed hundreds of uh, enslaved people, many of whom went and turned around and fought for the Union Army once they got to the north. So it had a huge impact, and she's not well enough remembered for that particular action in my personal opinion. This is the book, The Opera Sisters. So this is a historical fiction novel for those of you who are more fiction fans. It's a World War II novel, and it's about Ida and Louise Cook, and they're two British working class sisters who used opera as a cover to help Jewish refugees escape. They traveled at great risk to their personal safety in and out of Nazi-controlled areas prior to the outbreak of the war from London, and in order to help dozens of Jewish refugees escape. So their story is definitely a good one to look up for Women's History Month in March. And so then I thought I would mention what's next. I was telling Paul that I'm working on a couple of new books. One of them's a novel project, but my next nonfiction book is the sequel to Frontier Grit. It's actually going to be called American Grit. And yeah, it's kind of connected a little bit with the 260th anniversary, although it's not going to make it out in time, unfortunately. It'll probably be out next year, next spring, about a year from now. But two of the women that I'm talking about in that book include Nellie Bly, who was an investigative journalist, She traveled around the world in 80 days. She just kind of became famous for that. But before then, she went undercover into a health institution in New York City in order to report on the conditions of it, and just did like an incredible expose of this institution that brought around about incredible reforms um, in the mental health world. So that is Nellie Bly. And then on the left, we have Ida B. Wells. And the picture of me is in Memphis, Tennessee. And there's a statue of Ida B. Wells behind me. Um, and yeah, I'll briefly mention Ida B. Wells. So her face is on the quarter that just came out last year, 2025. Um, but she was an incredible suffragist, fought for women's right to vote. She was an amazing investigative journalist. And she also wrote a pamphlet that was really important to bring awareness to how racist the World's Fair was in Chicago, and they distributed that pamphlet there at that World's Fair, and then you can see like her main life's work was really as an investigative journalist around lynchings in the American South. She wrote the first comprehensive statistical analysis of lynching in the American South, and she brought international attention to the issue of lynching. She did a speaking tour all over Europe too to bring awareness there to that issue. So, yep. So keep an eye out for that. Maybe we'll do another one of these talks, and that is what I'm working on. Let's see. I think we'll go back to the beginning. Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions now.
Okay, let me get back here. Okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions? We're now in the Q&A portion type your question in the chat and or your comments, and yeah, that way we can read them. There is one question from Paul, another Paul. Hi, Paul. Are there any contemporary pioneer women today that you admire?
Oh gosh. Yeah, so many. I mean, I think I don't know, I wasn't expecting that question, but yeah, I mean, there's so many, and like there's so many different areas in which people can pioneer, right? Like I think I admire Jasmine Crockett and AOC and women who are pioneering in the political world, which is still in the US very, very male dominated, right? So, yeah, I would point to them. And then a lot of just really incredible writers. Hold on one second. Let me grab a book behind me. So, I have like books all over, but none of the ones that I wanted. Um, Yeah, this is a really incredible book, Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. So I'm just gonna say, like, I really am grateful for the people who are doing the work to help, like, to help find these stories, right? So that's one that I would point to also. So many incredible women. I mean, I would love to hear what people say, like, pioneer women currently that they admire and respect too. If anybody wants to chime in the chat, feel free.
And someone on the chat mentioned Amanda Gorman.
Oh yeah, for sure. The poet. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, she's doing wonderful work for
And then
sure.
some we had a comment here from Ann Richards, who said that she's been to Charlie Parker's grave in Watsonville. And
Wow, that I have not been there. That's so cool. I love that. I appreciate knowing about that. Next time I'm in the area, I'm gonna go visit it. Thank you.
yeah, I wanted to ask. So one of the things that attracted me or drew me to your book is the cover. So can
Uh-huh.
you tell us about the cover? Like what picture is this, and who are the
Yeah.
women on the cover on the picture?
So we don't know who. who they are, unfortunately. My editor found it, and I love the cover. I think it's so great. I was telling Paul before that like the only problem with writing the sequel to this book is like we're never going to be able to top the cover, unfortunately. But so they think that it's a historic photo that was staged at like a carnival. So, you know, how you can still go get you can dress up. My husband and I did this for a Christmas card this year, actually. You can put on old-timey clothes and get your picture taken at like those photo booths. This was kind of like that at like an old fair around the early 1900s. So, yeah. So I don't know how pioneering they were. I'm not sure that like that's the best like gun safety etiquette, but they may not have even. So yeah, it's a great picture, and I'm sorry I don't know like nobody knows exactly who they are. I wish they do. We did. So,
Mhm.
but they were definitely tough women. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So what part of the research process do you enjoy the most?
Oh gosh. Um, I really like I know it sounds corny, but it's sort of like whatever I'm working on at the time. But um, so usually, you know, with this book, like I said, I had to figure out how to define pioneer, and then I had to find the women that were going to go into it. And finding them was really exciting because I would find a story and I would just think, how have I never heard of this woman? You know, like the story is so incredible. How have they not made a movie about her yet? And so that part of it is really exciting, like that initial finding it. And then after that, I read everything I can find that's like published about that woman. So I kind of dive into this um, well of immersing myself in her world and trying to get into her point of view and figuring out like what was important to her um, because what I really want to do is tell a woman's story in a way that she would agree with, that if she could read it that she would say like oh that person understood me, like they understood what motivated me, you know. um, so yeah, so in order to do that I feel like I have to read as much as possible. And then I look for gaps in the published historical record, and then I start diving into some of the archival material um, where possible, and trying to pull in the pieces. Or if I find a bunch of like competing narratives, which happened with several of the women in this book, where you find like completely contradictory. Like there's this idea that this is how this happened. There's this idea. So then trying to dive into the archives and figure out, okay, what is like actually most probable, you know? And then I use footnotes to try to let the reader in on my process to see like this is the choice I made, but these are the sources. If you want to go read them and come to a different conclusion, I fully support that. So, but another one of my favorite process parts of it is the archival piece, especially when you can find something that's not published. I mean, this feels like a treasure hunt, you know? So you're like trying to gush, like, oh my gosh, I found this thing. Like
Mhm.
with the Civil War book, I was in a I was in an archival library in Virginia, and I found an actual letter that's unpublished from a soldier, a Confederate soldier, writing to a family member, and he's talking about a woman who had been a soldier, um, but like they discovered that she was female, and of course they took her uniform and discharged her, made her go home. But it was just so fascinating to like read the way he talked about it because he was sort of writing about it like this. It was like this fun, like funny thing that happened, but definitely didn't sound like, can you believe it? Like women aren't even capable. Like there was none of that. So it's just interesting, like what you pick up on in terms of for contemporary people, like how did they feel about this issue? And it really only tells you how this particular person felt about that issue, but it's often very different than what we as modern readers would imagine that somebody of that time would think or say.
Here's a question from Andrew. How do you decide which historical women deserve a full chapter versus a brief mention? What
Yeah.
makes a story make the cut?
I mean, that's a good question. A lot of it is, I mean, determined by how much there is, you know? I mean, a lot of times there's women where I'm like, oh, I would love to be able to write more about her, but we just don't know. There's just the records just don't exist. If I'm writing historical fiction, like the Opera Sisters, sometimes those gaps in the historical record are actually really fun because then I can just make it up because it's a novel, right? But I can't do that with nonfiction. So, yeah, so a lot of times it's bound by the historical record. A lot of times I'm always looking for stories that are going to be surprising and interesting to modern readers. And also because I'm a storyteller and not an academic, I'm looking for a good story, you know? Like that's part of what I really care about. Like, is this a story that keeps me interested and makes me want to keep reading late at night? You know, then it's probably going to impact my readers that way too. So, yeah. So part of it is just intuitive, like I've never heard this. My favorite stories are when I have to say like this is just an incredible story and like I had never heard this story. So I'm guessing other people might not have heard it either.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you, Andrew. Good
Mhm.
question. It kind of sort of related that when writing historical fiction based on because some of your books you've written are historical fiction based on real events and people. How do you balance historical accuracy with storytelling?
Yeah, that's a important thing to consider for sure. And every author of historical fiction lands somewhere on that spectrum, right? Like on the one side you have like just incredibly accurate historical fiction was just like connected to tons of meticulous research. And on the other side you have like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, like you know. And so most of us who write historical fiction like fall somewhere in between. For me, because I love facts and you know, like I'm one of those people where if I watch a historical movie, like when I'm done, the first thing I do is like I'm Googling like what's real, what's not real, what they make up, you know, and I'm always like so disappointed if there was like a major plot point that was just invented gratuitously. It just like makes me sad. So I mean, I love history, and I think very oftentimes that like truth is stranger than fiction, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so the way I approach my historical fiction is if we know what really happened, then I'm gonna stick to that, with a few minor exceptions. That makes sense to me, that might not make sense to other people. But if typically if we know what happened, then I'm gonna stick with that. And then for the parts that we don't know, then I'm gonna do a really good attempt at making an educated guess. So if we don't know what happened to a particular woman, we could look for women who were in a similar situation at a similar time in a similar place. And then I can't prove that it happened to this woman, but I can prove that it could have happened to this woman, that it's a good guess as to what may have happened, right? That the may is possible. And so that's often good enough for me, especially with a footnote to explain my decision. When there's true gaps in the historical record, like I wrote this novel, Her Quiet Revolution, based on the life of Martha Hughes Cannon, who was a frontier female doctor and the first female state senator.
Mhm,
She
mhm.
was from the state of Utah. So she spent some time in Wales, okay? And she wrote like a letter home that talked about like one or two, three things that happened while she was in Wales. And that's all we know because she burned her personal journals. So when I was writing that part in that novel, I just had the best time. I was like made up all this stuff and she met this lady and she was in this beautiful part of Wales. Like I had a great time writing it, but it was very much made up, but but I felt like I could just because there was a gap in the record. So there's nobody could tell me that it didn't happen that way. So
Yeah.
yeah,
All
that's how I.
right. Yeah, yeah. Well, our time is almost up, but I wanted to ask you before we end is like what oh, we got one more question here. Uh, do you find yourself changed by the women you research? Has anyone surprised you or challenged your assumptions? This is from Andrew.
I really love that question. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you.
You know, I was actually thinking recently that I literally think I'd be a different person if I hadn't spent the last 12 years immersed in researching these women's stories, you know? And especially the women in Frontier Grit, like anytime I've gone through like a difficult challenge in my life, all I have to do is think about those women, you know? Well, at least my house didn't burn down today and I have no insurance, like Lucinda Stanley Wilson, you know? She just had to pull things together and start it up and pitch a tent and build a new house, you know? Yeah, so like they're really great stories, I think, for just helping us to harness our own inner sources of strength and wisdom and resilience, which seems really good for right now, you know? Like, I think a lot of us are thinking, like, well, maybe I need to learn how to grow some of my own food and
Mhm.
make some of my own clothes, and maybe I should learn how to make some bread, you know? Like, and those are all areas of wisdom that pioneer women excelled at. Like they had that repertoire and they had that knowledge of how to survive at a very basic level. They worked with their hands and they made beautiful things, but they also just like helped themselves and the ones they loved to survive and to thrive, you know? So these stories have absolutely changed me and impacted me, and I'm super grateful for them.
All right. Well, let's conclude with this wonderful comment from Ann Richardson. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. This is one of my favorite genres to narrate. Best wishes for a blockbuster with your next book. And I agree. Yes. And uh, thank you so much for joining us. I invite everyone again to pick up a copy, check out a copy from the library of Frontier Grid. It's an engaging read. It's easy to read, and it's all ages. It's appropriate for all ages, and I enjoyed it. And I find myself, hoping to revisit the women that I've been introduced to in this book. Um, and yeah, pick up a copy. It's a good companion to the featured book this month, Silver Lies. So they're both one's historical fiction and one is just a powerful historical book that everyone should read. And thank you again, Marian. It's an honor to meet you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to the Friends of the Livermore Library for making this program possible. And yeah, thanks, Marian.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks for all your great work as a librarian. Librarians are our future, so thank you.
Thank you. All right. Good night.
Bye, everybody.